Kia ora tātou. Ka nui te mi ki a koe te kai whakahaere tēnā koe. Pai rawa ki te rongi o tō kupu whakamaramamatanga kia rātou mai tēnei tangata. Nō reira, tēnā koe. Tēnā koe. Hoki ana kia ngā tangata whenua kōnei. Tēnā koutou kia rātou. Mō ngā kai kōrero i te pōhiri o tēnei pō. Nō reira, ka nui te mi ki a koutou mō rātou te mana whenua kōnei. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Ia koutou mā, hui mai i rau te korua o tātou arihi tēnei pō. Nō reira, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou kei te tū moa koutou e uri o te waka tainui, me te waka mā tātou hoki ki te he hono e hao ki te tū moa koutou ki te whakamārama, te whakaaro mai te kaupapa, mai tēnā kaupapa i konei, o koutou e kātū he rangatira. Nō reira, a koutou mā tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou. Good evening. Nice to see you all here. And thank you very much for the kind invitation to come along and talk with you. I was just checking with Mary and just saying, what can I say that will be of relevance to your experiences and organisations? I'm only going to be here for 3/4 of an hour, so if it's not relevant, don't worry, it's not going to be very long. I hope it's relevant, and I'll try and make it relevant. I'm part of the formal education sector, so I'm not, you're sort of part of the informal education sector. And more power to you. You're very much if you like, you're under the radar really, aren't you? And much of what you do, I know, I suppose I shouldn't start off by offending everybody, should I? But maybe I'll try another tack. I might try another track, just in case I do upset people, but hey-ho, never mind. As I said, I'm part of the formal education system. And what I hope to be able to show you is that the formal education system has something to offer you in the informal or the more community-based education system. And I think the simple message that I've got is that relationships are foundational to education. And whatever you try and do will be built upon the relationships that you establish and maintain. And it's how you maintain the relationships, how you establish and maintain relationships, that will enable us to work with groups of people with whom we are culturally congruent. Now, this is pretty important. This is pretty important stuff, as far as I'm concerned, because it's no great mistake when you have a look at those people who are not doing well in the education system. They tend to be those who are not like the majority culture in the education system. And I'll bet that's the same in your sector as well as in mine. Those people who are culturally different than the majority, than the powerful, than the leaders in the education system are those who are doing least well in the system. It's not a mistake. That is in fact that's not just a historical accident. It is in fact a structurally created, socially and culturally created phenomenon. It's called colonialism in our case, and we are now living with the results of colonialism. And what I'm really impressed about in organisations such as yours is I see, talking with some people in the break, I hear that what's happening is that your organisation is getting browner. And that's one of the ways of changing an organisation such as this, of course, is to change the composition That's incredibly difficult in the formal education system, because in the formal education system we have incredible barriers that keep people out of the formal education system. And so as our student bodies are diversifying and becoming more and more diverse and more complex and more culturally diverse, our teaching forces remain steadfastly monocultural. Anyway, enough of that. That's the message. Bit of a long message, wasn't it? But that's the message. To put it very simply, what I'm going to say is I hope to be able to present to you in the next half hour or so an argument that says relationships are fundamental to education, and that anything you want to do, any new educational approach, anything that you want to do will be based upon the relationships that you establish and maintain with the groups of people with whom you work. I'm going to start by reading you a story. This is the start of a new book that I'm writing. It'll be out by Christmas, so there's your chances to you don't need to worry about your Christmas presents already. You can just keep an eye out for this one, because it's going to be a wee humdinger. What I'm going to write about, and I'm writing about, is relational pedagogies. The importance of relationships to pedagogy, how we teach, how we interact with other people in a learning setting. And I'm going to talk about this very topic, democracy in the classroom, because if we don't have a democracy, if we don't have democratic classrooms and a democratic curriculum, then I think one of the theses of your conference, which I very much appreciate and very much support, is that if we are going to have people who are participants, able to be participants in a democracy, then they need to practice being participants in a democracy. You can't just become a participant in a democracy when you're 18, or when you're 25, or when you're 55. You need to start being a participant in a democracy when you are a child, when you're very young. Child rearing practices need to be democratic. And what's really interesting is that we've made big progress in child rearing practices being democratic in our society. And we've made big progress in adult education being democratic in our society. But in our formal education system, from 5 through to 15 or through to 18, we are enormously undemocratic. We're enormously dictatorial. We're enormously culturally biased towards the culture of the majority. Let me read you this story and I'll see what you mean. So this is what I'm going to talk about. Democracy in the classroom. How can you create a situation where you can create a context for learning where young people can learn what it is to act in a democracy, to live in a democracy? Because democracy is one of those things that will save us in the world. Okay, I'm going to read you a story. I was in Canada recently and I was fortunate to be able to visit 2 schools with the local school district superintendent. One was a high school, the other was a primary. The schools are in a rural town of about 3,000 people. The children who attended these schools were from the town and its surrounding areas, which included 2 Aboriginal reservations. Unlike many other Aboriginal reservations in Canada, there were no schools on these reserves. Therefore, along with the other children in the area, the Aboriginal children attended the town schools, making up about 30% of all school roles. My main focus in all my work has been on Indigenous populations because, partly because of my own heritage, but also because where Māori goes New Zealand, and we know that. And we can see that as Māori get more and more rangatira tanga, New Zealand is actually benefiting from it. The Māori education system, the Māori economic system, and so on. The growth in the tribal wealth that has come out of the Waitangi Tribunal claims and so on and so forth, has made a tremendous impact upon the South Island, for example, what Ngāi Tahu have been able to do, and what's happening in our area at home with Tainui, Waikato Tainui, what's happening there. And so what's happening with Māori is going to be a tremendous touchstone on what will happen to the rest of our country. We were made very welcome when we arrived at the schools, and in both cases were quickly taken to some classrooms, as I had expressed a desire to see teaching in action. I was fortunate to be able to make a number of short visits to a number of classes, but I took particular notice of and lingered in 2 classrooms, one in the high school, the other in the primary. My interest was alerted because in both classes the curriculum area was social studies, which is a particular interest of mine. I used to be a social studies teacher. And the lesson topic in both cases was the same, global warming. Both classes were tasked with studying the relationship of global warming to human actions. There were a number of other similarities between the 2 classrooms. Both teachers were young, female, in their first year of teaching. Both classes had similar numbers of students in the low 20s and were ethnically of similar makeup in that approximately 1/3 of the children in both classes were Indigenous, the rest being primarily from a range of European backgrounds, what is probably called Canadian today. However, there the similarities entered, as in the high school class, only about 50% of the students were engaged in the lesson. The others either had their heads down asleep, were texting under the desk, or simply zoned out and staring into space. In stark contrast, absolutely all of the children in the elementary school were engaged in the lesson and were fully included in the learning that was clearly taking place in that setting. On closer inspection, it did not appear that the lack of engagement in the high school classroom was split along ethnic lines. The lack of engagement appeared to be shared by both sets of children, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. However, the most non-engaged student was a young Indigenous girl who had her head down on the desk and she appeared to be asleep. She became the focus of the Aboriginal support worker, who made a point of waking her up and insisting that she engage in the lesson. So in many ways, just by chance, I managed to stumble on a comparison case where many factors, including the ethnic makeup of the student body, the experience, the gender and the age of the teachers, the time of the day, the time of the week, the day of the week, the time of the year, nearing the end of the academic year, and the topic of the lesson was similar. What was of stark difference was the teaching approach. In the high school, the teacher was presenting a PowerPoint to the class. She was lecturing the class on the points that she developed herself for the PowerPoint presentation. And as I left, she was moving on to asking the students to watch a video that explained Al Gore's concerns about global warming, from which they were to answer questions on a worksheet. Whereas in the elementary school, the class was engaged in a cooperative learning activity I recognise as being termed expert jigsaw. The class had been divided into groups of 4, each member having a specific task to carry out on behalf of the group. These included task organiser, researcher, recorder and participant organiser. I noted the researcher in each group had an iPad on which they could access any information needed by the group. I also noted each of the others was taking their task seriously. The task organiser was ensuring the group members understood what they were expected to achieve. The recorder was making a record of outcomes of their joint deliberations, and the participation organiser was ensuring that all group members got a turn at expressing their ideas. What was clear that each group was fully engaged in addressing the problem they'd been collaboratively determined at the commencement of the lesson, and they were engaged collaboratively in identifying a means of presenting their solutions to others. And of particular note was the technology in the classroom was an adjunct to this lesson. It wasn't a focus of the lesson. It didn't take over good pedagogy. By far the most striking feature of the elementary classroom was the enthusiastic demeanour of the children in comparison to the very quiet, subdued manner in the high school students. The elementary class children were keen to share their learning with me and to include me in their cooperative groups, talking to me about the issues that we're addressing and how they were going to present their ideas to others. The high school students, on the other hand, did not look at me or seek to engage me in any way. Perhaps because I was looking a bit uncomfortable myself. I have a low boredom threshold, unfortunately. And I find PowerPoint presentations, like I'm going to show you in a moment, to be hideously boring. And you have to put up with it though, because I'm the speaker, you see, so you've got to put up with it. The high school students didn't look at me and seek to engage me in any way. It was as if I was not there at all, but I was told later my presence had made the teacher nervous. Again, in contrast, the elementary teacher was clearly delighted to see me there and was not nervous about having another adult in her classroom. Indeed, she explained later this was a routine matter and one she gained a great deal of support from. I asked about the attendance of the Indigenous students in both settings, because this is a major issue in the schooling area, and why I'd been asked to go there. And the elementary teacher explained they were no different from any other children in the school. They came on a regular basis, apart from genuine illness or family issues, were well prepared to engage in learning, and where possible were supported by their families to attend and participate in schooling. In contrast, the high school teacher reported that attendance was a major problem amongst the Aboriginal students. So on the face of things, it appeared the elementary teacher was using an effective dialogic pedagogy that meant that her students were fully engaged, while the transmission method being used by the high school teacher was insufficient to engage the learners in their classroom. She didn't engage me either, I'll tell you that for a starter. I remember going to another classroom in another school very close by, and it was Monday morning, and there were 12 Indigenous students in the class, and the subject was English. And I thought, well, I can handle this. And I was in the room, and the topic of the day was subjects and predicates. I thought I had to start to have my doubts about whether I could handle it at this point. And what had happened before this was that the day before I'd been having a conversation with the principal, and I'd said to the principal, how are your Aboriginal students going in your school? Because I said before, my main interest is in Indigenous students. And she said, not very well. I said, oh, how come? And she said, well, it's because they suffer from fetal alcohol effects. I said, oh, okay, so, because I'd heard about fetal alcohol syndrome, which is a medically diagnosed condition, and 1% of the population suffer from that, despite what the newspapers say. And she said, oh no, this is effects. This is what teachers have identified. And I said, what are the effects? What are the symptoms of this illness? She said, well, it's boredom, listlessness, an inability to concentrate, an inability to actually face the teacher and to participate in the lesson. And I said, okay, well, that's interesting. So the next day I went into the classroom, and here was this teacher teaching subjects and predicates on a Monday morning, breaking English sentences into subjects and predicates. After about 10 minutes or so of being in this classroom with the 12 Indigenous students, I went up to my colleague and I said, I think I've got a problem. I think that fetal alcohol's effects might be contagious. Because I found myself being bored and listless and unable to concentrate, unable to focus, and unwilling, and I was unwilling to participate in the lesson. Back to the story. Some observers might also say that the elementary teachers were engaging in what could just be called just good teaching. You know, primary school teachers, you know the old adage, primary school teachers teach kids, secondary school teachers teach subjects, and you know, you probably heard that old sawhorse. And there may be some truth in this, for there was a great deal of cooperation and collaboration going on between the students and between the teachers in the elementary school, whereas the high school teacher appeared to be fairly much on her own in terms of classroom practice, class control, lesson preparation and curriculum interpretation, and this appeared to be normal for most of the other high school teachers. For example, the class next door to the elementary teachers were also doing the same cooperative learning activity on the same topic, albeit the children were of a different age group and grade level. She and the other teacher had planned the activity together, had collaboratively determined the means of supporting the children to identify the issues that needed clarification, and they developed some of the materials and resources that the students might need. In addition, the classes were going to share with each other the outcomes at the end of the session, the recorder being the group spokesperson. So part of the work was focused on how each group could present their findings to other groups of students outside of their classroom, while being mindful of the other group's prior knowledge and understanding of the topic, so that their presentations were not too simple and therefore boring. That didn't worry the subject and predicate teacher. because they had a topic to get through, and they were going to get through no matter what was going on, despite me suffering from, I had no idea I suffered from fetal alcohol effects, but I seemingly I do. Maybe I suffer from adult alcohol effects, but maybe not fetal ones. In effect, the teachers in the elementary school did not appear to be concerned about content being age specific, topics being able to be studied by all age groups as they became relevant. What appeared to be more important to them was the process of learning and students learning how to learn and making sense of the new information cooperatively and collaboratively. Whereas the high school teacher had a transmission agenda going, the focus being on presenting information to the students for them to remember. However, I soon learnt that the mode of teaching in itself did not account for the complete engagement and inclusion of the Aboriginal students in the elementary school classroom. For while the inclusion of these children in classroom activities appeared to be normal for the first year elementary teacher, and she spoke about them in these terms, her school principal and the other more experienced teachers explained to me that in fact the pedagogy that they were engaged in was based upon tremendous amount of work that they had spent with the community and with each other in developing the relational base in the school. Now, they've been using a learner-centred approach for a long time. However, they'd noticed and been concerned that their own practices had not been sufficient to consistently include the Aboriginal students in learning. They explained that despite their having good intentions and their using an effective pedagogy, they continued to see high levels of absenteeism and associated low levels. They explained that their collaborative approach to planning and teaching the use of effective pedagogies was actually built on a great deal of relational work that they had done as a foundation for engaging the Aboriginal students in the classroom. I won't read a whole lot more, but basically what they were telling me was that they had spent a lot of time ensuring that their relationships in the classroom were foundational to their pedagogy. Their relationships with the community were foundational to the foundational pedagogies in the classroom. They'd spent a lot of time on what we might consider to be peripheral, but in fact, they showed me how foundational it was. Now this was music to my ears, as you can imagine, because I was as our organiser mentioned, I was running in New Zealand for 15 years a program called Te Kotahitanga, which is a Māori word for unity and purpose, and it's based upon another concept called Whakawhanaungatanga or Whakawhanaungatanga, which is in Māori means establishing relationships, in the form of establishing relationships as if it were an extended family. So this is music to my ears because I've seen that when you establish a relationship in a classroom as if it were an extended family, Māori children and Pasifika children and all of the children that we call minoritised, those children who have been not well served by the education system until now, all of a sudden, in a very short period of time, start to participate, start to feel that actually they are welcomed, they are wanted in the classroom. And then we started doing some more work on this and having a look, so what does this look like? I'm going to show you what it looks like qualitatively, then I'm going to show you what it looks like quantitatively, and using some statistical analysis of relationships and what it actually looks like in relationship to the type of pedagogy that we might use in a classroom or in your settings. And I want to show you how foundational this work is. I want to talk about a relationship-based teacher. What does a teacher do who is actually relational in their practices? They do these things. They do three things. The first thing they do is they create an extended family-like context in the classroom and in their schools. Leaders do this in their schools. And this is not soft, airy-fairy stuff. This is real, because it works. And I'll show you how it works and why it works. and time again. And there is a new report being released by the Ministry of Education in about 6 weeks' time that will probably, like most of the Ministry of Education reports, hit the bottom of the sea in a very short period of time. But if you're fortunate enough to get your hands on one, you'll see that the Māori children in the schools that we were working in what's called Phase 5, Te Kotahitanga, were doing 3 times as well as Māori children in a comparison group of schools. And this is over 3 years. And Māori children in these schools were achieving at the levels in level 2, at over 85% were gaining level 2 NCEA in a group of schools, in a randomly selected group of schools. And they were not just all high decile, many of them were low decile, decile 1, decile 2, decile 3 schools, etc., where most Māori kids are anyway. So our schools can do it. But what these schools were doing was that they were focusing on creating an extended family-like relationship where they were actually implementing whakawhanaungatanga in the classrooms and in their schools. Second thing they're doing is they're interacting in ways that promote learning and focusing upon interactions that will actually promote learning, but they will interact in a way that promotes learning within a family-like context in the classrooms. So that is very much in this order. And then the third thing is that they're evaluating on an ongoing basis student progress by using student voice and constantly knowing their impact, knowing what's going on. So you can see straight away that we've got away from transmission modes of education, and yet most of our schools are still cranking away trying to get this stuff, trying to ram the stuff down people's necks, trying to transmit knowledge, which is probably mostly out of date by the time you get into schools anyway, given the speed of which knowledge is developing and changing and growing, etc. I'm going to go through each one of these and I'm going to show you some stats to show you why it works. Creating an extended family context for learning consists of the first thing, is anti-deficit thinking. The first thing that a teacher does who wants to create an extended family-like context in a classroom is does not think negatively about their children. Does not think negatively about the people with whom they interact. Those people that I spoke about in Canada, when I said to the school principal, how are the kids getting on? And all I hear from her was, well, they're not doing very well because they suffer from da-da-da-da. I went to another place in British Columbia and I asked the principal there, how come, what are your kids, how are your Indigenous kids getting on? And she said, well, they're not doing very well. And I said, why not? Because she said they suffer from depression. I said, what are the symptoms of this depression? She said, listlessness, boredom, inability to concentrate. And I thought, oh, that's that fetal alcohol stuff, and I've heard this before somewhere. And what was even funnier about it is I then went along to one of the native assistants. They have this terrible situation where the Indigenous people are bunged off into sort of a ghettoised situation where they are the native assistant. I mean, they're the real teachers in the classroom, for God's sake. But anyway, they get paid about half what everybody else gets paid, and so on and so forth. And I said to this guy, Tyler was his name, I said to him, hey, you guys have lived here for 12,000 years. They're West Coast, Queen Charlotte Islands people. I said, your family's lived here for 12,000 years. How come? Have you been depressed for 12,000 years? Because the teacher explained to me is they get depressed because you have a whole lot of, it gets very dark there in the wintertime. You have a lot of, you only get many hours of daylight, etc. And Tyler said to me, I said, well, have you been depressed for 12,000 years? And he said, no, of course not. I said, well, when did the depression start? And he said, 1769. He could even give me the day when Captain Cook arrived. So the Indigenous population know what's going on. It's probably your best touchstone in many places. Is the people with whom you're dealing are the best touchstone for their experiences. And experiential-based education is fundamental to a relational-based education. I also went to another place in North America recently, and I went to in Utah. You know where they make the movie, there were John Ford made all the John Wayne movies. And there was those big messes and buttes that stick up and everything. You ever seen movies like that? Oh, you're far too young, this audience, isn't it? And anyway, I went to the school of Navajo kids, and I asked the teachers there, the principal there, how are your kids getting on? Not very well. How come? Well, they suffer from this time. No. This time they suffered from passive-aggressive behaviour. I said, what are the symptoms of passive-aggressive behaviour? Boredom, restlessness, listlessness, inability to concentrate. I also suffer from passive-aggressive behaviour, obviously, because I couldn't take the lesson, I couldn't take the classrooms either. Anyway, anti-deficit thinking. People who are wanting to create an extended family-like context, just think of the word family. You, in an ideal family, you don't have deficit thoughts about your children. These are our children. If we can convince educators to think of the people with whom they are in an educative relationship, and that these are your family, and that you have to think of them as having high potential. The second thing is you have to care for these children, and not just care for them as people. You've got to care for their culture, and care for their language, and care for them as human beings, and demonstrate this on a daily basis that you care for folk. These are fabulously important things, and you have to have high expectations for your children, because we do for our own children. Why don't we do this for other people's children? You need to treat other people's children as if they were your own. You imagine what a classroom would be like if you do this. And we've seen classrooms that are like when you do this. You have to be able to manage learning effectively. And you have to know what needs to be learned. What is it? 70% of our primary school teachers don't know how to teach mathematics, don't know enough mathematics to teach it. I mean, what? Can we not fix that? Surely we can solve that problem. I mean, we're not dealing here with ineducable people. Teachers are highly educable. How come they can't do maths? Maths is a lovely subject. It's a wonderful subject. Second thing is interacting within the learning context, using evidence of current performance. I won't spend too much time on this. Interacting discursively means interacting in a way that develops the discourse of the subject. And using power-sharing strategies that promote self-determination. Not standing and transmitting knowledge, but actually engaging and learning with young people within a context that you have created. This is easy stuff, as long as you've created a foundation for it. Whoops. There is a third one as too, and that is using the students, knowing your impact. I must have blocked it out on the plane this morning. There's a little bit of an air pocket there, and I must have pressed the wrong button or something. But never mind. There's a third point there, and the third part of this whole thing is about knowing your impact and talking to students and saying, how are you going? What are you learning? How do you know you're learning stuff? All that work from John Hattie is very useful in this whole area, showing us how important it is. And all the work that I did back in 2001, which started the whole Te Kotahitanga project, when we asked a whole bunch of Māori kids, what's it like to be a Māori kid in secondary schools? And they said, it's lousy. And we said, why is it lousy? And they said, because people treat us appallingly. And why do they treat you appallingly? Because we're Māori. They couldn't see beyond it. So they gave us some very good, and then we said, so what would you do to fix it up? And they said, well, develop some decent relationships with us. Some of the best conversations that I've had about education have been with 14 and 15-year-old Māori students. They know what's going on. They're the best consumers of education I've ever come across. And some of the most erudite and articulate conversations I've had. I can hardly keep up with writing stuff down that these folk tell me that should be happening. They know what's going on. I don't want to do that. I want to talk about the empirical evidence now. I want to show you that scientifically this is able to be verified. This is probably a graph. I'm just going to whip through this because I'm a bit worried about the time. When teachers create caring and learning relationships, family-like relationships, they're able to use more effective teaching interactions. That's the point that's relevant to you folk. Your teaching interactions will be more effective if you base them upon caring and development of caring and learning relationships. Now, here's what I want to show you. This is a summary of 15 years' work. So can we just look at it for a minute, please? Because it's, I hate to flash something up and then whip it on quickly, okay? Because it's just, that's the darn thing about maths, isn't it? You can summarise things in a real quick way, you know, but you can summarise, there are 3,400 interactions there from 1,200 teachers. And along the bottom of the graph, there is a measure going from left to right of relationships. You can ask me later how we managed to measure that, and I can tell you that it was done scientifically, so that it is actually verifiable. Now, as you go from the left to the right, the people on the right are more relationship-based than the people on the left. The quality of the relationship. Thank you. And it's in terms of those 5 things before, in terms of their anti-deficit thinking, their ability to demonstrate caring for the children, their ability to demonstrate high expectations, and so on and so forth. Whereas the vertical axis of the graph shows the interactions that take place. Now, they could be the things that you could be doing with your learners, or teaching your teachers to be learners, with learners, etc. So it shows there that there is a relationship between a relationship at the bottom, as teachers get better in relationships, and the type of activity they do. And the more effective the activity goes from the bottom to the top of the graph. So it shows you that there is more people in at the right-hand side of the graph, and as you get up towards the northeast of the graph, the top right-hand corner, that's where things really start cooking. Now, what's interesting about this graph is if you have a look at the top left-hand corner of the graph. Are you with me? Does it make sense? The scatter graph? Look at the top left-hand corner. What's interesting about that to me is that there's not one interaction plotted on that corner, in that quadrant. Which means that there is not one person who has a low level of relationships with their students who is able to use highly effective pedagogic interaction strategies with their students. In other words, if you have a low level of relationship with your students, you'll teach in an old-fashioned, boring transmission mode of teaching, like I am now. You can only get away with it for 8 minutes at a time. That's about as long as people can concentrate. It's about 8 minutes. I can see this from watching you here, and I'll start another 8 minutes in a moment. Now, what's other interesting about that is we looked at the probability of this happening, and we saw that the probability of it happening is actually measured in an exponential manner. In other words, as you get further along the gaff, the chances of you being able to use a more effective approach to teaching increases exponentially. It doesn't just go arithmetically, it doesn't just go 1 and 1 or 2, it goes 2, 4, 6, 8. It gets better and better really quickly. Now, what that shows us is that relationships are foundational to interactions. So anything you do will get better if it's built on a foundation of relationships. And if there's any message you get out of this talk tonight, That's the one I'd like you to get. The same with engagement. Along the bottom, relationships, up the side, student engagement. And you can see that there is a correlation between the two. As people get better at relationships, students are more engaged. Top left-hand corner, again, is empty. In other words, low levels of engagement, of relationships, means virtually no student engagement. Whereas the other encouraging thing is, the bottom right-hand corner shows that those teachers that have got the highest level of relationships have very high levels of engagement, and virtually nobody in their classroom is not engaged. So you want to engage students in learning? Improve relationships. Don't worry about engagement, it'll look after itself. And here's the empirical data to verify this stuff. We've been saying it for 15 years, and we've now got it. And this stuff has been published in one of the top journals in the world, American Education Research Association journal. So it's been through a stringent peer review process, and it is a very useful understanding. And if you want to make an improvement for Indigenous, other minoritised students, this is the way to do it. Again, exponential growth. The better you get at relationships, the more engaged kids will be, and it'll happen more and more quickly. Now, does this actually improve outcomes? Yes, it does. Here's a look at mathematics. Again, it's hundreds and hundreds of students across a range of mathematics classes, and at the bottom we've got teachers differentiated by standard deviations from the mean in the middle there, and we are seeing as you go from the left to the right, those teachers who are better at relationships, the students, Māori students in their classrooms do better at mathematics. There's a couple of anomalies in that graph, but never mind. It's caused by the sample number. Now, this was all, when we started in 2001, in Te Kotahitanga, we started by talking to students, and they told us this. They said there's two sorts of teachers. There are those teachers who have low teaching skills to high teaching skills. There are teachers who have low caring to high caring. Kids know about this, and they say this is really important. And they identified four sorts of teachers: those who had low caring and low teaching skills, those who had low teaching and high teaching skills, and they said, you do have people there. They just don't seem to care for us kids. And they said there are high caring teachers with low teaching skills. But they found those teachers to be very patronising. And they said, we don't learn in those classrooms. The only classroom that we learn in is that one, where you've got a high caring teacher who has high teaching skills. So high caring means high levels of ability to create caring and learning relationships in a classroom. Again, you can overlay that last graph with the first graph I showed you by putting that there, and you can see where the students agree. And there's a whole bunch of people down on the right here who think they're doing a good job, but the students tell us that they're not. So it's really important to listen to your clients. Very important to listen to whom you're teaching, because they will tell you that that's not working for them. Okay? Nō reira, ko mutu te kōrero kia koutou e te pōnei. I hope this has been of use, and I hope it's relevant to your experiences as well. It's certainly, this sort of work has certainly made my day, and I hope it makes yours as well. Kia ora tātou. Well, I'm probably the wrong person to ask that question of, because you need to ask the politicians. because they fund this sort of stuff. But they've gone off on some crazy idea where they're letting 1,000 flowers blossom, and everybody's now going to have a crack at it. Everybody's going to have a crack at it. You see, what was happening for 15 years, we worked on the program Te Kotahitanga, and it was starting to show some really good results. And I mean, like three times the gain in schools as compared to a comparison group of schools. You don't get that by accident. You don't get it by chance. And the minister herself acknowledged that 6 years ago at a SPANS conference, some friends of mine who were school principals were at home last night and just reminding me of this, that 6 years ago she said, we have a program in New Zealand called Te Kotahitanga, which is actually making a big difference for Māori students. It's the only thing we've got, but it's too expensive. So we're going to do something else, which is cheap, but doesn't work. I mean, go figure. I don't know. But I mean, to me, incarceration of Māori is expensive. It costs over $90,000 to keep one Māori male in prison, $127,000 to keep one Māori female in prison. And most of the prison inmates, most of the female prison inmates are Māori, and 52% of our prison inmates are Māori, male. I mean, you've only got to save, and for $90,000 we could run this project in a secondary school. I don't understand. I don't know the answer to the question. It seems to me that every time we find the answer to something in our country, we give it up. I'm now working in Northern Australia. And in Northern Australia, we've just been there for 3 years, and we've found that children, Aboriginal children, who have one of the least dramatic records in education, as you know, after 3 years, in both maths and in reading, are making 18 months gain in 9 months through programs, through this sort of program. So there's Northern Territory people are working on it, because they saw that the programs they had, such as sending the army in, it didn't work, and all that stuff about child abuse. Remember the Northern Territories? Seemingly that was John Pilgers told us that was actually a land grab by mining companies. It was a government-assisted land grab. I mean, you got some nasty political things going on around this stuff as well. Good question. Wrong person though.